Welcome to the chaos sector. We return to the Matrix. Some believe that Dylan will be testifying in the upcoming trial. We disagree. You have to understand that it's not just about her so-called memory loss or how she wasn't sure about certain things. It's her conflicting witness accounts. We broke all of this down years ago, and now it's reaching the breaking point. In one account, Dylan was simply asleep, heard what she assumed was Kaylee upstairs playing with Murphy. This would mean Murphy was barking, of course. Goes on to claim that someone stated, quote, "There's someone here," unquote. It was suggested that this was Kaylee, yet detectives interjected within the affidavit, suggesting that it may have been Xana who made that statement due to being on TikTok. Everyone has seen episodes of Law and Order and other true crime series. You've all seen that one witness whose story doesn't add up, right? They claim they didn't see anything, or they weren't at home during a murder. Yet later on, they slip up and say something that proves the contrary. And well, they end up being arrested for conspiring with the individuals who committed the murder. This is Dylan. It's that simple. Her accounts have changed, and it proves that there was more to that night than what was reported. And the most damning evidence is that her whereabouts were not confirmed, or better yet, articulated at any point. Claiming she was, quote, out on the town does not specify where Dylan was exactly, you see. Everyone else in that house was cleared with specific locations, including the other surviving housemate, Bethany. It's not like we want Dylan to be guilty of any crime, but if the information proves she is linked to the murders, our task is to follow that link. Let's review this from Law and Crimes article. Quote, though more than one page is entirely redacted and referring to the survivors by their initials, the affidavit written by Moscow Police Department Corporal Brett Payne alleges that Mortensen not only overheard the sounds of the killing, but saw the killer walk right past her, unquote. Well, looks like Payne was preparing to throw Dylan under the bus immediately, right? Why? Because if he is alleging that Dylan overheard the attacks and the murders, then saw the murderer, which was approximately around 4 a.m., then this same Dylan sat in the home for over 8 hours without calling the authorities while her housemates lied deceased. Yet, if he asserts this, then obviously he would confirm that she knew about it in her interview. And there you go. The cover-up was activated by Moscow PD at this point. Puts the affidavit into perspective, right? Now he would suggest the phrase, overheard the sounds of the killing, meant she just heard noises that ultimately were the noises of killings. Yeah, but why wouldn't he just say Dylan heard noises? Or better yet, why even say anything about it? Her affidavit would speak for itself. They were so eager to push the narrative that she witnessed the alleged lone killer. Payne thought that mentioning Dylan overheard the killings justifies the claim that she saw the killer. You see? But not realizing that it exposes Dylan for not doing anything about those killings. Let's break it down anyway. Quote, Dylan stated she originally went to sleep in her bedroom on the southeast side of the second floor. Dylan stated she was awoken at approximately 4 a.m. by what she stated sounded like Gonzalez playing with her dog in one of the upstairs bedrooms, which were located on the third floor. A short time later, Dylan said she heard who she thought was Gonzalez say something to the effect of "there's someone here." A review of records obtained from a forensic download of Kernodle's phone showed this could also have been Kernodle, as her cellular phone indicated she was likely awake and using the TikTok app at approximately 4:12 a.m. Dylan stated, according to Payne here, Dylan stated she looked out of her bedroom but did not see anything. When she heard the comment about someone being in the house, Dylan stated she opened her door a second time when she heard what she thought was crying coming from Kernodle's room. Dylan then said she heard a male voice say something to the effect of, "It's okay, I'm going to help you," unquote. Okay, you have to keep in mind that Payne asserts that Dylan overheard the killings, right? So throughout this time frame, where there was, quote, crying heard, this would be an attack Dylan overheard. But if you notice, it says what she thought was crying coming from Xana's room, rather than saying what she thought was Xana crying in her room. The difference is creating a setting where Dylan didn't know if Xana was crying, which would prompt her to check to see if she was okay. Yet at the same time, based on Payne's summary, Dylan knew that her housemates were being attacked and murdered. Now, the obvious question here is how are they pushing the narrative that the surviving housemates were not aware of any danger in the home? Yet at the same time, Payne states he believed that Dylan was aware of the murders in real time. Insanity, a bunch of garbage. Quote, Dylan stated she opened her door for the third time after she heard the crying and saw a figure clad in black clothing and a mask that covered the person's mouth and nose walking towards her. Dylan described the figure as 5'10" or taller, male, not very muscular, but athletically built with bushy eyebrows. The male walked past Dylan as she stood in a frozen shock phase. The male walked towards the back sliding doors, unquote. As we pointed out years ago, it states that Dylan opened her door for the third time, yet it never clarified that she closed her door the second time prior, after she heard crying. This means her door was still open. One would say, well, no, it says she opened her door for the third time, right? But it doesn't clarify she closed it for the second time, though, you see? As we concluded, Dylan was listening to the attacks in Xana's bedroom with her door cracked. After all, Payne alleges she overheard the killing, so it's the same conclusion. This is the official affidavit released, yet a key element that was not addressed was Payne's assertion that Dylan was aware of the killings. If you're aware of the killings in real time, then see the killer walk past you, then exit the home, what is the first thing you would do? Well, call 911 while it was occurring. That would be the first thing. Okay. Let's say you were literally frightened and couldn't think straight. Well, afterwards, you go check on your housemates. They're deceased. Surely now you call 911. Even if you don't call 911, you're calling someone over to help deal with the situation. We know Dylan did, but again, for the sake of the nonsense. In another interview, though, Dylan provides a totally different setting in the home. For this source, we examine News Nation's article. Ashley Batfield provides us with this contradiction. Quote, a survivor of the University of Idaho killings allegedly thought the noise resulted from partying, asked the victims to quiet down, and mistook the killer as a guest, a source exclusively told News Nation. Unquote. Now briefly, who is this source? Because they apparently spoke to Dylan and she gave them these witness accounts. Quote, the source spoke directly with surviving roommate Dylan Mortensen, who allegedly yelled about the noises heard during the killings because she mistook it for partying. Mortensen allegedly first heard noises around 4 a.m. She opened her door and yelled, quote, calm down, you're being loud and I'm trying to sleep, unquote. So she opened her door and yelled at her housemates to quiet down? She thought it was a party going on. Which scenario was it, Miss Mortensen? Because your affidavit does not provide these accounts. Your Honor, we find that Miss Mortensen's accounts are not reliable. This is why the prosecution wouldn't put her on the stand. She's literally the trail to the frame job. Let's continue. Quote, she then closed her door and locked it, according to the source. Later in the night, Mortensen heard more noises, so she opened her door. She saw the killer walking down the hall, but she wasn't frightened. She assumed he was a guest of the other roommates there partying, according to the source. Unquote. This is pathetic. But you see, this is why we've literally glued our investigation to Dylan. She is the key to the truth, and who was responsible for those murders. Let's read a bit more because there's a justification of Ethan's death that we definitely dispute. Quote, additional details released last week shed light on how the killings unfolded. Kaylee and Madison were killed first. Sources confirmed to News Nation that Ethan and Xana were killed on the second floor afterward. Now, who is determining which victims were murdered first? A source. How can a source, which is not any detective nor medical examiner, determine who was murdered first? Unless, pay attention here, unless that source was notified by Dylan, who, that's right, overheard the killings that night. Yet, to protect Dylan, they won't mention her name in association to the source, but the source is the one who fucking talked to Dylan. I'm done. This is starting to piss me off.
Won't elaborate how the source claims who were murdered first, because they would get this information from Dylan. And of course, how the hell would she know who was murdered first if she wasn't aware of any danger in the home due to partying? Or even more devastating, how would she know who was murdered first if she never checked to confirm it? Of course, Dylan can confirm these claims because she overheard the killings. The source obtained this information, yet mainstream media wouldn't dare clarify that the source obtained this information from Dylan. Yet it's hidden in plain sight with the very claim the source is making. It's insanity. Let's try to continue without going insane. Quote, they also said that Chapin was killed in the doorway of Kernadle's room, and Kernadle apparently fought back. She repeatedly grabbed the knife from suspect Brian Koberger, and she suffered deep cuts to her fingers. Chapin apparently suffered a slash to the neck, according to sources. Unquote. Okay, let's calm down and try to get through this. Now, to claim that Ethan was slashed in the neck conflicts with the wounds described in the autopsy report. It was claimed he suffered wounds from a blunt force object. So if he suffered a slash to the neck, this appears to be an attack that was to instantly murder Ethan. Yet this would mean there was a physical altercation prior, and Ethan was severely injured and not capable of defending himself anymore, along with Xana. And his neck was slashed to finish him off. It wasn't the only attack, though. This clearly is a physical setting where Ethan is defending Xana. Going back to the exhibit, it states that Dylan saw Xana lying on the floor of her bedroom, with her head towards the wall and her feet toward to the door. Key terms here: doorway and floor of her bedroom. Ethan was discovered in the doorway, while Xana was discovered on the floor of her bedroom. Meaning Xana was physically inside her bedroom, while Ethan was in the doorway of her bedroom, meaning he was discovered in front of Xana. Now what does this mean? It means that Ethan was protecting Xana. In addition, it states that Dylan attempted to contact Ethan through Snapchat. Now why is Dylan trying to contact these specific housemates via social media when she's right across the hallway from the bedroom they're in? Oh, she's so scared to go knock on their door? Well, which scenario are we applying this fear to? The one where she was frozen in a shocked phase, or the one where she thought there was a party going on and didn't think anything of the male she spotted? Everything is cancelled out due to the conflicting accounts. This is her problem. Nothing can be pinpointed because they're different settings in the home, described by one person. Now we know the attempted phone calls are fraudulent because based on Payne's assertion, we're going to keep mentioning this by the way. Payne's assertion was that Dylan knew her housemates were being attacked then murdered. So all of the text and calls were a form of an alibi. And even within that scenario, someone would have decided to physically go check on the housemates anyway. If Dylan and Bethany were upstairs with Kaylee and Madison around 2 a.m., so-called talking for a while, they somehow are incapable of checking on them once they felt something was strange? This is all rhetorical, but for the scope of the investigation in relation to the trial, we have to present them. Dylan was calling left and right, but never once thought to actually go upstairs. Some believed that Kaylee and Madison were not actually murdered at the home, but their bodies were brought back. We acknowledge that theory is possible, due to the discrepancies of when they allegedly arrived back home. Since we know that Eric Gower was not, I repeat, was not the private driver, and Batman was clearly suspicious in his accounts, it's possible that they were basically kidnapped before arriving back home. Yeah, going back to the coat on Taylor Avenue for a moment. That was the coat Madison was wearing that night. Either it was dropped there, with what appeared to be a weapon wrapped inside, or it's possible that Madison and Kaylee tried to run away and the coat was there. It's possible their bodies were dropped off at some point. We can't verify anything because they haven't released any footage from the neighbor's security camera during the time frame they allegedly arrived back home. The screenshot at 1:56 a.m. does not prove anything. But if their bodies were dropped off, nothing really changes. Dylan would have went to go check. Especially Kaylee, right? There was clearly some sort of envy, or dare I say, attraction to Kaylee by Dylan. Maybe she was the one obsessed with Kaylee? Possible. Okay, let's examine the alleged actions of Dylan for a moment. Dylan runs from her room and heads to Bethany's room on the first floor. Now, based on her claim, she saw Xana lying on the floor, right? I don't think anyone is convinced that Dylan merely glanced over and continued to run to Bethany's room, right? Okay, so let's break down the likely scenario. Dylan stopped and approached Xana. But here's the problem, she would see Ethan first, not Xana. So why didn't Dylan mention seeing Ethan lying on the floor as she ran by? Well, I guess he was discovered in Xana's bed, murdered in his sleep via a knife slash. But if he was murdered in his sleep, why would there be multiple attacks upon him if he was already deceased in the bed? Mind you, his wounds were caused by, quote, sharp force. Doesn't add up, so more than likely we go with the other claim, that he was discovered in Xana's doorway, which of course places his body in front of Xana. Dylan saw him initially as she so-called ran by, but didn't claim to see him first, because it would indicate he attempted to defend himself in Xana. And of course, this engagement is very unpredictable for the alleged lone killer. Anywho.
Wait, let's make sure we don't move too fast away from this. In the article, updated back in 2023, it claims Ethan was slashed in the neck, right? Now, let's look at the claim again. Quote, Ethan Chapin suffered a slash to the neck. He was also deceased with wounds later determined to be caused by sharp force injuries. Autopsy findings revealed that Ethan Chapin was stabbed multiple times with a large knife, sustaining injuries that caused him to bleed out. Unquote. He was also deceased with wounds later determined to be caused by sharp force injuries. It's framed in a way that he was slashed in the neck first, then was stabbed multiple times. I think it's reversed. He was stabbed multiple times by a large knife, fought until he couldn't fight anymore, and then his throat was slashed as the final blow. This would be the fatal blow. As we pointed out, the only way Ethan couldn't be a factor is if he suffered a fatal blow. Because even being stabbed multiple times against a lone killer and with Xana's fierce challenge, Ethan could still be a force despite his stab wounds. Yet, it says large knife. That does not sound like a K-bar knife to me, right? Perhaps a kitchen knife? That could do a lot of damage, my friends. Someone close to him did go to the kitchen to grab a kitchen knife. I leave it here.
Two birds with one stone. Let me mention something as well. Some claim that these are, quote, rabbit hole theories which are convoluting the investigation. Negative, everyone has a foundation of what happened. These theories are generated from that foundation. Also, we are only generating these theories based on what is being presented to the public, such as the 911 audio and all unsealed documents, and of course the overall information in the case. There is a cover-up, and that circle knew what happened, that's established already. Yet there is a possibility that not only did they know what happened, they could have been involved as well. No stone left unturned in an investigation, something Moscow PD failed to do. Let's continue though. Dylan approached slowly and saw both Ethan and Xana so-called unconscious on the floor. Now we know she knew they were deceased, based on our investigation, and well, common sense. But we're gonna apply the lead detective's claim to this scenario to really expose it all. Since Payne claims Dylan overheard the killings, when she ran past Xana's bedroom, she definitely went to evaluate the situation. Dylan called someone at 4:27 a.m., which would be moments after the murders. So just putting this into perspective, Dylan overheard the killings, saw Ethan and Xana's bodies on the floor, and called someone at 4:27 a.m. What do you conclude here? We believe that this person was Hunter. Keep in mind, Dylan was friends with Emily, who was best friends with Xana, who was in a relationship with Ethan, whose best friend was Hunter. Just use your common sense here. Dylan called them prior to the 11:50 a.m. call. Even in the setting where Dylan so-called thought Xana was unconscious, she would still call Xana's best friend, which is also her friend, being Emily. As we pointed out, they would not identify Hunter as the contact at 4:27 a.m., because the communication would be about the setting in the home, which prompts Hunter to come to the home, meaning he would also have knowledge of the murders approximately 8 hours prior. We can include Emily as well. So that contact was never identified. I believe it's possible that Xana was still alive, wounded, but still alive, lying on the floor next to Ethan, who was deceased. And Dylan didn't want to help or interact with Xana. She avoided the situation in regards to helping. For Ethan to be essentially murdered by his throat being slashed, he would have been overpowered and severely wounded by Kohberger, protecting Xana. Keep in mind, based on the source, that they are the last victims. And based on Payne's assertion, Dylan overheard the killings. So if Dylan heard the killings, then Ethan and Xana heard Kaylee and Madison being killed, right? We went over this, just going over it again to bring it all back in association with the previous episode. I'll cut to the chase. They claim Ethan's neck was slashed to justify him not being a key element of muscle in the home. Eliminating Ethan as a challenge, by his throat being slashed, it justifies the probability that a lone killer can run through the home with his victims being young women. If there isn't a fatal wound such as a slashing to the neck, it's pretty hard to convince anyone that the alleged Kohberger simply overpowered Ethan, even by stabbing. Because if Xana repeatedly grabbed Kohberger's knife, what do you think Ethan would have done? He was over 6 feet, perhaps weighed over 200 pounds, and was young and healthy. And the greatest element in that setting is he is protecting the love of his life in Xana. In other words, the alleged Kohberger would find himself in a fight for his life. Somehow, he gets close enough to Ethan, and I guess he swiped at his neck? No evidence he had any knife training. How did he slash Ethan's neck? Oh, that's right, in the other claim, it reports that Ethan was discovered deceased in Xana's bed. Oh, okay, I see how it works. As we pointed out, the only way Ethan wasn't a factor in that home is he was murdered while sleeping, by his throat being slashed. Oh yeah, that's right. But if he was murdered before Xana, how could Kohberger just walk into her bedroom, slash Ethan's throat, and then turn his attention to Xana? What was she doing during this time frame? Oh, she was in the kitchen, came back, and nope, her body would be discovered in the hallway, not her bedroom. Think about it. If Xana and Ethan were in the bedroom, then the alleged Kohberger can't attack both at once. We've already broken this down. The same concept applies with Kaylee and Madison. Kohberger enters Xana's room. Ethan and Xana may have had a moment of fear. Then Kohberger attacks Ethan, while Xana is screaming and such. But since she was depicted as quite fierce, do you think she sat back while Ethan was being attacked? If she was reported to repeatedly grab the knife from Kohberger, wouldn't she try to grab Kohberger's arm while he was attempting to stab Ethan to death? Of course. So obviously this is not adding up, and it's because there were multiple attackers. Exhausting, but we have to do it because they're trying to sneak out the back door, with Dylan's face being covered with a coat. Now let's go back to the audio from the 911 call. We acknowledge that it could have been, quote, she warned Kaylee, unquote. But actually it sounds more like, quote, she won't cave, unquote. Let's examine once again. We can come to the conclusion that the first word was she. I think it's clear enough to detect that specific word. Also, there aren't many terms that are associated with this setting that begin with the letters S and H, which make up the sound heard. So we can confirm the first word in the statement is in fact she. Now let's examine the second word a bit deeper. Honestly, it could be either warned or won't. But we can determine which word was stated based on the last word. Let's listen closely. At the very end, we detect a word that has the letter V in it. The first letter has to be either K or C. And since the letter V is heard, the word cave seems to be the most logical here. One more time to confirm. She won't cave, that seems to be the statement made. Now what would Dylan be talking about? Well, since they're so-called checking to see if Xana was breathing or not, Dylan is referring to Xana's condition. She won't cave is basically saying that Xana won't give up, meaning she's not caving. There's an anomaly though, because this is allegedly later Sunday morning, around 11:50 a.m. I don't think Xana would still be alive at this point from the attacks prior, unless her injuries weren't fatal. Okay, let's think about this for a moment. We all agree that the call clearly is not authentic, in the sense that everyone in that home is aware of deceased housemates. Okay, that's the first point we have to establish in this breakdown. Second, the exhibit creates a scenario where Ethan went upstairs, grabbed a knife from the kitchen, and proceeded to prevent everyone from coming to Xana's room. Mind you, he tells them, quote, get out, unquote. The second point to establish. Then, Hunter and Emily exit the home, along with Dylan and Bethany, and tell them to call 911, due to observing Xana so-called unconscious. That's the third point to establish, which is where the suspicion comes about. Bethany calls 911, dispatch is asking about Xana, and everyone goes to check to see if Xana was breathing. Before we continue, I feel it's imperative to listen to this again. Here we go.
Going on currently? Is someone passed out right now?
I don't really know, but pretty much at 4 a.m.
Okay, I need to know what's going on right now if someone is passed out. Can you find that out?
Yeah, I'll come. Come on, Bethany, we gotta go check. But we have to. Is she passed out? What's wrong? She's not waking up.
Okay, one moment. I'm getting help started that way.
Now we know that Hunter discovered Ethan first, so it's almost like they are ignoring his body and focusing only on Xana's condition. And this seems to justify our theory that Xana may have still been alive. I mean, if Ethan is deceased along with Kaylee and Madison, yet Xana is still alive, everyone will focus their attention on her. But it can't be because they want to help save her though, it's more out of a fearful intrigue, do you see? They're intrigued on one hand, because she survived the attacks, but fearful on the other, because if she survived it would cause major problems.
Okay, thank you.
Now there are so many problems with this audio, it's gonna eat up all of our episode. Don't want that to happen. This heavy breathing is obviously someone who has realized Xana and Ethan are deceased. For the sake of this nonsense, let's try to rationalize this very moment. Hunter goes to Xana's bedroom, realizes she's not breathing, also sees Ethan not breathing, and it is at this moment he knows they're deceased. But he doesn't say it, he doesn't notify dispatch that the housemates are deceased. Yet we just can't give this merit. Because this same reaction would have been Hunter's reaction prior to the 911 call. So what is all of this heavy breathing for then? To make it appear that something has been discovered at that moment that caused the reaction. And you see, this cunning scheme by Hunter and everyone else is to cover up the murders as much as possible before authorities arrived. Yet we go back to the question, Why wouldn't Hunter tell them to call 911 when he initially discovered Ethan and Xana, quote, unconscious? Again, to keep everyone focused. In the exhibit, it states that Hunter went upstairs to investigate, grabbed a knife out of the kitchen, and had gone to Xana's bedroom, noticed she was, quote, unconscious, told everyone to get out, they all exited the home, and it was at this point he told them to call 911, due to them being, quote, unconscious. It also states his face was pale, as if he saw a ghost, right? Yet, the same scenario prior to the call was then carried out again in the call. If he went to check prior and told everyone to get out, why is he doing this once more? There is a missing piece of evidence here we're trying to find. The only thing that seems logical here is that the entire call was carrying out a scheme for a discovery that happened hours prior. And carrying out the scheme hours later is to justify that nobody knew what happened until they so-called discovered Xana unconscious. An alibi used in the call, but actually gets exposed simultaneously. Don't misunderstand, everyone knows the call was hiding the fact that there were deceased housemates. But since the exhibit mentioned that Hunter had previously discovered Xana unconscious, it led to even more scheming. The call and the individuals involved, mainly Hunter and Emily, had to have been called soon after the murders occurred. That's the distinction we're making, that they were there prior, and then came back to carry the scheme out in the call. I think, though, that for this to be exposed, to truly dissect it the way we did, the defense will have to point this out when they play this audio in court. They're going to play it, no doubt about it. But the defense should rebuttal and question why didn't they notify dispatch that the housemates were deceased, or a better term used, murdered upon discovery. And since Dylan's accounts have been flat out eviscerated, the call would be exposed as a scheme to cover up the murders. Keep in mind, Payne alleged that Dylan overheard the killings and saw the killer walk past her. If Dylan knew her housemates were being attacked then murdered, and yet she was running around on social media instead of calling 911, then she literally sat in the home with deceased housemates, running around on social media. How could Payne explain that wacky scenario? The only way Dylan would do such a thing is she was an accessory to the crime. Bethany may face obstruction of justice and possibly accessory to murder charges, either before or after the crime. Based on her making the call, it could be after the crime. But the actual conspiracy to have those housemates murdered, which is an accessory, we don't have any proof that Bethany was involved in that conspiracy.
Okay, and how old is she?
She's 20.
20, you said?
Yes, 20. Here's one.
Okay.
Hello? Hello?
Okay, I need someone to stop passing the phone around because I've talked to 4 different people.
Okay, sorry, they just gave me the phone.
Is she breathing?
Hello?
Is she breathing?
No.
Now, out of all of that, we focus on the statement, she won't cave in, you see? Because Dylan is referring to Xana in saying she won't cave in. There is another possibility here. And this audio is actually a recording of a previous call that happened hours prior. Oh, but we never saw paramedics heading to the home in any surveillance. We didn't see any paramedics heading to the home from the other Linda Lane camera facing Taylor Avenue. Yeah, but think about something for a moment. The paramedics didn't arrive first. It was authorities, remember? And we know the unmarked cruiser was driving around town that night and ended up back in the neighborhood around 4 a.m. Come to think about it, have we actually seen the paramedics at that home? Can't recall any photos or local reports showing this. All we see is a bunch of police cruisers and detectives surrounding the home, not one photo of paramedics at the home. We understand not showing the bodies being brought out of the home, that's understandable. But if they were there, then someone had to have taken photos of the crime scene with the paramedics. Is this because the actual call was from earlier that night, and the authorities were first to the scene and discovered the housemates murdered? No need for paramedics here, cold-blooded murders. If authorities arrive at a crime scene and someone is clearly deceased, paramedics would be called off because there's no need for them. Instead, the coroners would be called to come pick up the bodies. At some point at night, those housemates were hauled off before sunrise. It makes sense, better to do it while it's still quiet in town, before everyone wakes up and there's traffic everywhere. And the arrival of authorities later on was to simply carry out the scheme. Some may disagree here, but Dylan's statement about Xana not caving in would more than likely be when Xana was still alive, which would be soon after the attacks. And we have to factor in that Hunter went upstairs and grabbed a knife. If this was at 11:50 a.m., with the assumption that Xana was, quote, unconscious from drinking, why would Hunter go grab a knife? It's daytime now, the so-called killer is long gone. Dylan has been texting and running around on social media. She wasn't scared at 11:50 a.m. We can acknowledge that she would state that there was a man in the home, yet she would have called soon after if that's the case. And that's why we believe Hunter was called at 4:27 a.m. It was still dark, and Xana was still alive after the attacks. Hunter going into the kitchen to get a knife is more logical. It's deeper than that though, due to the statement about Xana not caving in. This indicates that Dylan is expecting Xana to die, yet she was still alive. And well, Hunter goes into the kitchen, gets a knife, and then ends her life for good. This is during the call.
The call was actually made soon after. We know it's not confirmed, and we can't emphatically support this theory. But there are a few elements that do support the theory. As mentioned, there were no photos of paramedics at that home, at least from our knowledge. We never saw a single photo showing paramedics at the crime scene. This indicates that authorities arrived and ruled everyone deceased at the crime scene. They would then call the coroners to come pick up the bodies. If you recall, officers described the crime scene as a bloody scene, right? Now, if they described that, then obviously everyone in the home observed the same thing. The coroner, Butthead, claimed she got to the home a few hours after the authorities arrived at the scene. Misdirection, it seems. I don't think Dylan and Bethany would have sat in that home, being a bloody massacre for over 8 hours. Some believe they left the home, but maybe they left the home after the authorities spoke to them, and the coroner took the bodies away. Meaning, the 911 call was actually made soon after the murders, and what we assume to be a call made around noontime was made in the wee hours of the night. But why would they manipulate the time of the call, you ask? It's simple. For one, they can't report that the call was made soon after the murders, because it would prove that Dylan and Bethany were aware of the murders. Changing the time to noon justifies the narrative that they weren't aware and had discovered their housemates, quote, unconscious, and other peers had come to the home to figure out what was going on. It creates an alibi. But if the call was made soon after, it would really put Dylan's affidavit into question. Heck, it may have been totally different. They wouldn't have all that time to be allegedly texting and running around on social media neither. It's possible they left the home. Some believe Dylan's boyfriend came to pick her up in the infamous black pickup truck seen in the body cam footage. That would be around 3 a.m., right after Kaylee and Madison's calls stopped. Dylan comes back though, because she's a part of the conspiracy. Bethany calls Dylan at some point. Dylan calls Emily and Emily calls Hunter. They all are at the home overnight. Also, can't recall where this was, but we read an article that stated the neighbors came to the home because they heard screaming. And that would be the reason they were there, you see? Honestly, why would Dylan or Bethany call them over to the home when Hunter and Emily were friends with 2 of the victims? In fact, there is no phone record that states those neighbors were called, unless those neighbors arrived soon after due to hearing screaming. Keep in mind, right next door, we know they heard screaming and yelling. Yet, in the report it claims that there was a whimpering sound, dog barking, and a loud thud detected by their security camera. No mention of screaming? Oh really, that's strange. They not only heard the screaming, but knew violence had occurred, perhaps was peeking out of their window, as seen here in this photo. Then when everything concluded, they snuck over to the home. The probability of this scenario is highly likely, especially if we factor in the claim they heard screaming. Don't worry, we're digging to find that article, so we can solidify this analysis. We know they were there overnight though, it's common sense. And if they're there overnight, surely these individuals aren't just sitting around in a home that's a bloody scene, right? So it supports our theory that the call was made overnight, not 8 hours later. The great misdirection fooled everyone, but you can't hide the truth. The point here is there's a cover-up, so everything is subject to be misdirection, misinformation, deflections, and flat-out lies. There's something interesting about the state of Idaho regarding coroners. Idaho does not explicitly require mandatory reporting to the coroner for deaths in local law enforcement custody, deaths at the workplace, or deaths that may constitute a threat to public health. What we gather from this is law enforcement could have waited to report the deaths for some time, to assist in covering up the murders. Quote, "It's okay, I'm going to help you." That statement never coincided with the lone killer narrative. If they didn't want to be identified by wearing all black clothing and mask, why in the hell would they speak revealing their voice? It was someone who wasn't a killer in our opinion, rather, someone who had arrived at the home. The unmarked cruiser had come back, my friends. It's in the security camera footage. Most believe it's something an officer would say anyway, but they tried to paint it as some demented lone killer, toying with his victims. Yeah, nice try. And if an officer was there overnight, then, well, we know the call was made overnight, but shifted to 12 p.m. to protect everyone in the cover-up. Quote, "She won't cave," unquote. This indicates Xana was still alive during the call, which was overnight. And the heavy breathing during that call could have been when Hunter decided to end Xana's life. We can envision that dreadful scenario. It's not far-fetched. If Dylan was involved, then we have to assume that Emily and Hunter at least knew the murders would happen that night. And you see, this puts it into perspective even more. Dylan was involved, she was friends with Emily, and Emily and Hunter were at the home, in which Hunter went upstairs to get a knife and was breathing heavy in the call. Seems like he was in shock after deciding to silence the surviving housemate. For good. We come to the conclusion all of this activity was overnight, not later Sunday morning. The call was made, everything was sorted out in the cover-up, coroners came and swooped up the bodies. And this is when Dylan and Bethany were on social media later on. Then to make the cover-up official, authorities came back to the home later Sunday morning, and the story hit national headlines. On top of that, Payne claimed Dylan overheard the killings. Yeah, that's a good way to end this episode. This is the Chaos Sector.